1800 horsemen charged down a hillside and changed the course of human civilization. In 60 seconds, 3 centuries of unstoppable conquest came crashing to an end. This is the moment when the mightiest empire on earth discovered that sometimes courage weighs more than numbers. 300 warriors versus 15 defenders. The odds were 20 to 1. The fate of Christian Europe hung by a thread as thin as Vienna's crumbling walls. By the end of this video, you'll understand how the largest cavalry charge in history saved Western civilization, why a Polish king became Vienna's unlikely savior, and the underground nightmare that nearly broke humanity's last defenders. But here's where it gets insane. Beneath Vienna's streets, men fought like demons in absolute darkness. The Ottoman commander's greed became his army's doom, and religious enemies who'd slaughtered each other for centuries united for one desperate gamble. Why did the Ottomans choose slow starvation, overwhelming assault? What drove sworn enemies to fight side by side? How did starving defenders survive 60 days against impossible odds? These aren't just questions. They're the keys to understanding how history pivoted on a single September afternoon. The Polish king who arrived like divine intervention, the tunnel warfare that broke men's minds, the moment when mathematics turned into massacre. This is the story of the siege that made the Ottomans mortal, where the crescent moon met the cross's shadow, and where courage multiplied while numbers divided. Picture 300 warriors converging on one city. Imagine yourself on those walls watching the horizon turn black with enemy banners. The largest army ever assembled in Europe versus a handful of exhausted defenders. What happened next defied 4 centuries of military logic. To understand how 1800 horsemen saved Europe, we must first understand the empire that had never been stopped. If you're fascinated by the untold stories of history's most decisive battles, hit that like button and subscribe for more epic war content. Ring the notification bell to witness how outnumbered defenders changed the world. Now, let me take you back to the summer when Europe's fate balanced on a knife's edge. The year was 1683, and the Ottoman Empire stood as the superpower that swallowed nations. From the gates of Morocco to the Persian frontier, from the Ukrainian steppes to the Sahara's edge, the Sultan's word moved armies like chess pieces across 3 continents. This was an empire that had devoured the Byzantine legacy, crushed medieval kingdoms, and turned the Mediterranean into a Turkish lake. Vienna represented the golden apple, both symbolic and strategic prize. Control Vienna, and you control the Danube. Control the Danube in Central Europe opens like a book. The city stood as Christianity's eastern fortress, the cork in the bottle that kept Islamic expansion from flooding westward. Enter our cast of titans, Mustafa Pasha, the ambitious Grand Vizier whose dreams of glory would birth a nightmare. Sultan Mehmed Ivth the Hunter, more interested in his hounds than his empire, leaving Mustafa to chase destiny alone. These men commanded history's most disciplined war machine. But Europe was fatally divided. France and the Habsburgs locked in generational hatred, Catholics and Protestants still bleeding from the 30 Years' War. King Louis XIV of France secretly celebrated. Every Ottoman victory weakened his Habsburg rivals. Christian unity existed only in prayer books. The ghost of 1529 haunted Ottoman dreams. Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent had failed to take Vienna. Weather, logistics, and stubborn defenders had forced history's greatest sultan to retreat. 54 years later, that failure still stung Ottoman pride like a poisoned thorn. What happened next defied belief. While Europe squabbled, the Ottoman Empire mobilized with terrifying efficiency. One command from Istanbul set hundreds of thousands in motion. a unified war machine versus a fragmented continent. The mathematics spelled doom. The Janissaries formed the empire's steel spine. Stolen as children from Christian families, they were forged into living weapons. No families, no distractions, just absolute devotion to Sultan and conquest. Each Janissary was worth 10 ordinary soldiers and 40,000 marched toward Vienna. Then something occurred that nobody expected. Reports reached European courts of unprecedented Ottoman preparations. Not just another raid, this was total war. Cannon foundries worked through the night. Supply trains stretched to the horizon. The Ottoman Empire was bringing everything. Spring 1683 brought the avalanche. Mehmed Roman IV declared jihad. Kara Mustafa received the sacred banner of the Prophet. The message thundered clear: Vienna must fall. The golden apple would crown the Ottoman Empire as Europe's master. History held its breath as the world's mightiest military machine turned its gaze northwest. But in the spring of 1683, the Ottomans made a decision that would either crown them masters of Europe or destroy them utterly. The Ottoman host defied counting 100, 000, 200, 000. Some witnesses swore 300, 000. The uncertainty itself became a terror weapon. What's certain is this: it was the largest army to threaten Europe since the Mongols. A moving city of war that darkened 20 m of road. The Janissaries marched at the army's heart, 40,000 of the finest infantry on earth, stolen as children, forged into living weapons. They knew no trade but war. Their discipline was legendary. While European armies might break and run, Janissaries died where they stood, each worth 10 ordinary soldiers. They formed mountains of discipline that had shattered kingdoms. Supporting them came the Sipahi cavalry, the Ottoman knights who perfected mounted warfare. Armed with composite bows, sabers, and lances, they moved like flowing mercury across battlefields. 50,000 horsemen who could shoot backwards at full gallop, wheel and charge in perfect formation, or dismount and fight as infantry. But numbers don't tell the whole story. The Tartars of Crimea joined 20,000 steppe wolves who lived for plunder. These auxiliaries served as the army's eyes and terror. They swept ahead, burning everything, driving refugees toward Vienna to consume precious supplies. Psychological warfare perfected over centuries, the logistics staggered comprehension. 60,000 camels, 40,000 supply wagons, field bakeries, armories, hospitals, an entire civilization on the march. The Ottomans brought not just warriors, but the infrastructure of conquest. This wasn't a raid, it was permanent expansion. Against this tide stood Count Ernst Rudiger von Arhemberg, the immovable, a Protestant commanding Catholics, a man whose iron will would become Vienna's backbone. He commanded 15,000 professionals, good troops, but desperately outnumbered. Every calculation showed the same result: mathematical annihilation. Vienna itself prepared for apocalypse. Every church bell was melted for cannons. Citizens drilled with pikes. Women learned to carry ammunition. Children practiced running messages through bombardments. The city transformed from commercial hub to fortress. But the walls, those walls were the problem. Built for medieval warfare, they now faced modern artillery. Then came the message that changed everything. Leopold I, Holy Roman Emperor, abandoned his capital. The court fled west, leaving Starberg to his fate. Panic rippled through Vienna's streets. If the emperor himself ran, what hope remained? But Starberg stood on the ramparts and declared, Vienna holds or Vienna dies. There is no third option. Geographic reality compounded the crisis. Vienna controlled the Danube crossing and the Alpine gateway. Lose Vienna, and nothing significant stood between the Ottomans and the German heartland. Paris itself lay only hard marching away. Every European court understood Vienna was civilization's breakwater. July brought the storm. Ottoman advanced guards appeared, Tatar raiders who swept through the suburbs like locusts of war. Behind them, dust clouds announced the main host. Refugees flooded the gates with horror stories. Entire villages erased. Churches burned. The Ottoman military machine ground forward with inexorable purpose. Here's where it gets insane. Kerem Mustafa ordered a massive military parade. For 3 days, the Ottoman army displayed its might. Regiment after regiment, cannon trains that seemed endless. The psychological message was clear. Resistance is suicide. Surrender now and receive mercy. Fight and face annihilation. But the defenders had one advantage nobody counted on. Vienna's citizens refused to break. Bakers, merchants, housewives, ordinary people who chose to become extraordinary. They looked at those overwhelming numbers and made a collective decision that still gives historians chills. They would fight to the last child. Pattern interrupt. Starberg ordered the suburbs burned. Better to destroy their own homes than give the Ottomans cover. As flames consumed 1,000 years of growth, Vienna became an island fortress in a sea of ash. The message to the Ottomans was equally clear. Well, burn it all before we kneel. What followed broke every rule of siege warfare. The final preparations turned desperate. Every piece of metal became a weapon. Every cellar became a shelter. Every able body became a soldier. Vienna girded itself for a siege that would test the absolute limits of human endurance. On July 14th, the horizon turned black with Ottoman banners. July 14, 1683, dawn broke to reveal humanity's nightmare, the Ottoman host spreading across the landscape like locusts of war. Witnesses spoke of a living carpet that flowed over hills, a dark tide that swallowed the earth. The ground itself trembled under the weight of 300 souls converging on one city to decide the fate of millions. The visual overwhelmed human comprehension. Silk banners in 100 colors, the green standards of Islam floating above regiment after regiment, cannon trains that stretched beyond sight, the morning sun glinting off enough weapons to arm every man, woman, and child in Austria. This wasn't an army, it was a force of nature. July 17 brought the first bombardment, thunder without storm. Ottoman artillery opened with calculated precision, not wild-firing, but methodical probing, finding range, testing walls. The defenders counted over 300 cannon from small field pieces to massive siege guns that required 50 oxen to move. Each shot shook Vienna's ancient stones. Initial skirmishes erupted at the outer works. Small fortifications beyond the main walls became scenes of savage fighting. Here's the detail that still gives historians chills. The Janissaries attacked in complete silence. No war cries, no drums, just disciplined killers advancing through musket smoke like ghosts. The outer defenders broke within hours. Sterenberg ordered tactical withdrawal to the main walls. No heroic glass stands in indefensible positions. Every trained soldier was precious. As defenders fell back, they destroyed everything useful. Poisoned wells, burned supplies, collapsed buildings. Vienna would offer the Ottomans nothing but death. By July 18, Ottoman encirclement was complete. Vienna became an island in a sea of enemies. The last messengers slipped out before the noose closed entirely. Their reports to the outside world read like apocalyptic visions. The city is surrounded by a living wall of warriors. Only God can save us now. Then Kara Mustafa made a decision that would echo through centuries. Standing before his war council, the Grand Vizier chose slow starvation over overwhelming assault. Why lose 50,000 men in bloody storm when hunger would open the gates? Why destroy the prize you came to claim? Greed whispered sweeter than wisdom. But beneath the city, something unimaginable was happening. Ottoman engineers began mining operations, the underground war that history forgot. Tunnels snaking toward Vienna's walls like serpents of earth. The defenders heard them. In the dark beneath their feet, picks rang against stone. The underground nightmare had begun. First tunnel encounters defied humanity. Austrian miners broke into Ottoman galleries 30 ft below ground. Hand-to-hand combat in absolute darkness, men strangling each other by touch, knives finding flesh in spaces too tight to swing swords. Cave-ins burying fighters alive, enemy and friend entombed together. What happened next remains military science's greatest case study. Vienna's civilians mobilized with unprecedented unity. Women became ammunition carriers, running powder to the walls through bombardments. Children, as young as 8, served as message runners. Grandfathers who'd survived the 30 Years' War taught musket drill to merchants. Daily bombardment became psychological torture. Dawn to dusk, Ottoman guns maintained their rhythm. Not enough to immediately breach, just enough to prevent sleep, fray nerves, chip away at sanity. The thunder became Vienna's heartbeat. Children learned to eat between impacts. Surgeons operated by candle light as walls shook. This is where courage became calculation. Starberg distributed defenders with mathematical precision. This section needs 40 men. That bastion can hold with 20. Every soldier placed like chess pieces on a board where one mistake meant annihilation. No reserves. Everyone on the line. Disease arrived. The invisible enemy. Dysentery from contaminated water. Typhus from overcrowding. Infections from untreated wounds. By August, Vienna fought 2 wars. One against the Ottomans, one against pestilence. Bodies piled faster than they could be buried. The stench became another weapon against morale. But Kerem Mustafa had made a fatal miscalculation. His Ottoman trenches crept closer, serpents of earth approaching the walls, zigzagging to avoid defender fire. Each night they moved forward. Each dawn brought them nearer. But time wasn't only the Ottoman ally. Unknown to the Grand Vizier, forces stirred beyond his sight. Pattern interrupt number 2 struck the Ottomans. Strange rockets rose from Vienna's walls, not weapons, but signals, coded messages to watchers on distant hills. The defenders still hoped, still believed rescue might come. Kerem Mustafa dismissed them. Who would dare attack his mighty host? Food began running out. Horsemeat sold for gold. Cats disappeared from streets. Leather soup became a delicacy. Children grew skeletal, but here's what the Ottoman chronicles tried to hide. The defender's spirit refused to break. Starvation arithmetic faced empire's abundance, yet Vienna held. The tunnel war escalated into hell beneath earth. Both sides used primitive explosives. Entire sections collapsed, burying dozens alive. Survivors spoke of fighting in spaces so tight they couldn't stand, of recognizing enemies only by the language of their dying screams, of emerging from shifts underground, unable to stop shaking. By August, Vienna was dying by degrees, but then something extraordinary began happening across Europe. August transformed Vienna into humanity's nightmare. Horsemeat became memory. Now rats fetched premium prices. Leather boots boiled into soup that tasted of desperation. Tree bark ground into flour that turned bread into sawdust. Mothers chose which child ate today. The mathematics of starvation wrote itself on hollow faces. The tunnel warfare escalated beyond comprehension. Both sides abandoned humanity in those earthen veins. Fights with mining picks, men drowning enemies in mud. The wounded left to die in darkness because rescue meant death. Sappers worked naked to feel cave-in vibrations on their skin. This is where legend meets documented fact. Hand-to-hand combat reached new depths of savagery. In spaces too tight for weapons, men bit throats, gouged eyes, crushed windpipes, Austrian and Ottoman engineers killing each other with bare hands in absolute blackness. The only light came from explosive flashes that revealed glimpses of underground hell. Cave-ins became weapons. Engineers deliberately collapsed tunnels on enemy miners, living burial as tactical choice. Survivors emerged mad, speaking of friends and foes dying together in earth and embrace, of continuing to fight while dirt filled their mouths, of feeling enemy heartbeats slow against their chest. Then came mathematics turned into massacre, the Great Mine explosion. Ottoman engineers packed a massive chamber with gunpowder beneath the Lowell Bastion. The detonation on August 12 opened Hell's Mouth. A section of wall simply vanished, defenders thrown 100 FD. In the crater, Janissaries poured through, Vienna's death seemingly assured, but the real battle was just beginning. Starberg himself led the countercharge. Citizens with pitchforks joined soldiers with swords. In that crater, grandmother fought beside grandson. The breach became a meat grinder that consumed 1,000 lives in an hour. Somehow, impossibly, the defenders held, but God or luck had other plans. As Vienna bled, Leopold's desperate appeals finally found receptive ears. The Polish parliament did the unthinkable, voted to send their army abroad. King Jan Sobieski, who'd spent his life fighting Ottomans, recognized destiny's call. What happened in the next 60 seconds defied belief. So I didn't just bring soldiers, he brought hope. 20,000 Polish warriors, including 3,000 Winged Hussars, the finest heavy cavalry on earth, a force that had never known defeat. David had found his sling. German princes overcame centuries of hatred. Protestant and Catholic commanders who'd slaughtered each other's armies now shook hands. The Duke of Lorraine brought 20,000. Bavarian contingents added 11,000. Saxony, Franconia, Suabia, ancient enemies united by greater threat. Mathematics began shifting. Here's the detail that still gives historians chills. The combined relief force reached 70,000. Still outnumbered perhaps 3-1, but no longer facing impossible odds. More importantly, these weren't conscripts, but Europe's finest warriors, veterans who'd spent lifetimes perfecting war. So, Sobieski's march became legend. 400 m in 2 weeks through hostile territory, crossing rivers under fire, his winged Huss maintaining their armor despite summer heat. Every delay might mean Vienna's fall. Yet the Polish king maintained iron discipline. No looting, no delays, just relentless advance toward destiny. By September 1, the relief force massed north of Vienna. Signal rockets from Kahlenberg Mountain told Starberg salvation approached. But Vienna might not last another week. September 111 became Vienna's final agony. The walls crumbled. 16 major breaches gaped like mouths. Ottoman artillery had fired 30,000 cannonballs, each chipping away at hope. Defenders down to 3,000 effective fighters from 15,000. The rest were dead, wounded, or too sick to stand. Civilians filled the gaps. Bakers with halberds, merchants with rusty swords, women with pikes, children throwing stones. What followed would haunt soldiers for generations. Ordinary people choosing extraordinary deaths. A Tor holding a breach alone for 20 minutes. A grandmother pouring boiling oil until Turkish sabers cut her down. The Ottoman final assault preparations began. Karam Mustafa sensed victory's proximity. Janissary battalions massed. Siege towers rolled forward. Scaling ladders stacked like timber. The Grand Vizier promised 3 days of plunder. Vienna would be erased as warning to Christianity. Starberg played his last cards, secret sorties to spike Ottoman guns, suicide missions to burn siege equipment. Every small victory bought hours, but destiny had one more card to play. On September 11, watchmen spotted movement on Kenberg Mountain. Not Ottoman reinforcements, but Christian banners. But here's where it gets insane. Kar Mustafa refused to believe it. Surely no force would dare attack his mighty host. He interpreted the warnings as defender tricks, even as his subordinates begged to prepare defenses. The Grand Vizier focused on Vienna's walls. Pride's arithmetic would prove fatal. Signal rockets burst from Vienna's walls, not distress but recognition. The link was established. Tomorrow would bring either salvation or annihilation. Starberg ordered every church bell to ring. Let the Ottomans know Vienna still lived, still hoped, still fought. Dawn, September 12, 1683. History pivoted on 1800 horsemen. But first came the chess match. The relief army positioned on Kenberg's slopes, 70-0 Christians against 150-0 Ottomans. Many were besieging Vienna, imperial forces on the left, German contingent center, Poles on the right. Each piece placed for maximum impact. Ottoman confusion crippled response. Kar Mustafa divided between maintaining the siege and facing this new threat. Worse, command structure fractured. Some commanders wanted full withdrawal from Vienna. Others urged aggressive defense. The Grand Vizier chose neither. Fatal indecision. Initial probing attacks began at dawn. Austrian infantry descended first, testing Ottoman positions. The response revealed everything. Ottoman forces were scattered, uncoordinated, surprised. What should have been an impregnable position showed gaps, chaos where there should be order. Then mathematics met miracles. The imperial forces engaged the Ottoman right, drawing reserves. German center pressed forward, finding unexpected success. Ottoman resistance stiffened, Janissaries proving their reputation. These mountains of discipline didn't break easily. Musket volleys swept advancing Christians like scythes, but Soy watched, waited. The Polish king read the battlefield like scripture. He saw Ottoman cavalry reserves committed piecemeal, saw gaps opening in their lines, saw the moment approaching when courage would weigh more than numbers. His winged Hussars stood ready, steel angels awaiting divine command. Statistical shock registered across both armies. 180,000 men in motion across miles of battlefield, the largest concentration of military force in European history. Cannon smoke turned noon to twilight. The ground itself seemed to burn. This wasn't battle, but collision of civilizations. Ottoman resistance began cracking. Not breaking, cracking. Elite Sipahi cavalry charged German positions, but found themselves unsupported. Infantry units fought magnificently in isolation. The Ottoman army's greatest strength, iron discipline, became weakness without unified command. Each unit fought its private war. Here's the detail that still echoes through militarisms. Kar Mustafa's command post remained at the siege lines, not the battle. The Grand Vizier couldn't abandon his obsession with Vienna, even as his army needed leadership. Messages took precious minutes. Orders arrived obsolete. Coordination collapsed. By 400 p.m., the battlefield resembled organized chaos. Christians pressed from heights. Ottomans fought in separated pockets. Vienna's defenders watched from walls, praying, hoping, some preparing to sally forth. The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Then King Jan III Sobieski gave the order that would echo through eternity. 4 p.m. September 12, 1683, Soy raised his saber. 1800 cavalry began forming the steel avalanche. At the center, 3000 Winged Hussars adjusted their legendary wings. These weren't mere decorations, but psychological weapons. The feathers would whistle in the charge. Death's anthem approaching at 40 mph. The mass of horsemen defied visual comprehension. 4 ranks deep, 2 mi wide. Sunlight turned their armor into flowing mercury. Lances lowered like a forest of steel. Hoarse breath misted in afternoon air. The ground began trembling before they even moved. Physics itself seemed to pause. The charge began with terrifying beauty. Walk, trot, canter, the Winged Hussars maintained perfect alignment despite rough terrain behind them. German heavy cavalry, Polish medium horse, light cavalry on the flanks, an entire mounted army flowing downhill like an avalanche of flesh, steel, and determination. Then physics took over. Gallop, the thunder started. 70 zeros. 0 hooves striking earth in rhythm that shook Vienna's walls. The whistling began, hussar wings creating an unearthly sound. Ottoman soldiers later swore they heard supernatural screaming, angels or demons descending. Ottoman psychological break started before impact. Imagine standing in their position, the earth quaking, a wall of steel approaching at full gallop, the sound, thunder mixed with banshee wails. No time to form squares, no space to maneuver, just 2 mi of death descending. But the Janissaries attempted their final stand. These elite infantry didn't run, they formed ranks, muskets leveled, first volley at 100 yards, horses and riders tumbled. Second volley at 50 yards, gaps appeared in charging ranks, but momentum equals mass times velocity. Nothing could stop 18,000 horsemen at full gallop. Impact. The Winged Hussars hit the Ottoman lines at 40 mph. Lances pierced multiple men. Horses became battering rams. The first Ottoman ranks simply disappeared. Crushed, pierced, trampled. What followed broke every rule of physics and psychology. This is where legend meets documented fact. The charge didn't stop. It punched through Ottoman lines like a spear through silk. Janissaries, those mountains of discipline, were swept away. Sipahi cavalry caught stationary were overrun. The Ottoman center didn't break. It shattered. Kerem Mustafa's moment of realization became history's turning point. From his command tent, the Grand Vizier watched his invincible army dissolve. The golden tent, symbol of Ottoman power, stood abandoned as he fled. In 4 hours, 3 centuries of Ottoman dominance shattered like glass. The rout became mathematics of massacre. Ottoman cohesion vanished. Units fled without orders. Heavy equipment abandoned. The Siege of Vienna forgotten. Survival became the only goal. An army of 150,000 became a mob of terrified individuals. Vienna's garrison burst forth. Starberg led skeletal defenders from the gates. Starving soldiers found strength for one last effort. Civilians followed with anything sharp. The besiegers became the besieged. The hunters became the hunted. In 4 hours, 3 centuries of conquest turned to ash. The rout surpassed military comprehension. Ottoman army disintegration happened in real time. 150,000 warriors reduced to panicked individuals. Elite Janissaries threw away their distinctive caps to avoid identification. Sipahi cavalry abandoned precious horses. Artillery crews fled, leaving loaded cannon. 3 centuries of unstoppable conquest ended in 4 hours of unthinkable chaos. Pursuit turned systematic slaughter. Christian cavalry, sensing total victory, showed no mercy for the merciless. Light horsemen ran down fleeing infantry. Tatar auxiliaries, famous for their speed, found themselves outpaced by vengeance. The mathematics were simple. 20 zeros. 0 Ottoman dead littered the field. Bodies marked the retreat route for miles. Camp looting revealed wealth beyond dreams. Kerem Mustafa's tent contained treasures from 3 continents, sacred banners worth kingdoms, chests of gold that required teams to move, jewelry, silks, weapons, the accumulated plunder of an empire. But here's what the Ottoman chronicles tried to hide. They found the Grand Vizier's correspondence, proving French encouragement of the attack. The human cost wrote itself in crimson. Ottoman losses reached 20 zeros, 0 dead, unknown thousands wounded, but Christian losses 4, 5, 100. Acceptable price for civilization's salvation, the disproportion defied military logic. David hadn't just defeated Goliath, he'd obliterated him. Vienna's liberation scenes burned into history, skeletal defenders embracing well-fed rescuers, children seeing sunlight after 2 months underground, families reunited or discovering who hadn't survived, tears of joy mixed with grief's bitter salt, freedom tasted like bread after 2 months of leather soup. So I entered Vienna as savior of Christendom. The Polish king, showing humility and triumph, stopped at a church before accepting a claim. His words entered legend. I came, I saw, God conquered, not Caesar's boast, but Christian acknowledgement. The winged Hussars shattered Islam's advance, knelt in prayer. Personal stories emerged from survival's arithmetic. The baker's widow who died defending her husband's body. The drummer boy found at his post, hands frozen to drumsticks. Count Starberg, the immovable, collapsed from exhaustion in Soy's arms, Victor's weight finally breaking iron will. What happened next defied every law of warfare. Soy prevented the typical 3-day sack. Vienna had suffered enough. Instead of looting, the relief army shared supplies. Protestant and Catholic soldiers who'd slaughtered each other for generations now shared bread with starving civilians. Crisis had forged unity from hatred. Kara Mustafa fled through the night. Golden dreams transformed into nightmares. The Grand Vizier who'd promised his Sultan Vienna's keys now carried only shame. Behind him, the greatest army ever assembled in Europe, dissolved like morning mist. Ahead waited only the silk cord, Ottoman tradition for failed commanders, but victory's price hadn't been paid yet. The immediate political consequences rippled outward. Leopold I, the fleeing emperor, rushed back to claim credit he hadn't earned. Soy, the true hero, found himself politically sidelined. German princes squabbled over captured Ottoman treasures. Unity forged in crisis began fracturing in victory. The Ottoman retreat became a running disaster. Harassing cavalry turned withdrawal into bleeding. Supply trains captured, stragglers slaughtered. The army that had moved like clockwork now stumbled in chaos. Every river crossing became a killing field. Autumn rains turned roads to mud that swallowed artillery. Statistical shock reverberates through history. 60 days that changed the world. A siege that should have lasted weeks, stretched to 2 months. 15,000 defenders had held against 300,000. Mathematical impossibility made real through human will. Vienna's survival rewrote the rules of siege warfare. This moment would echo for 3 centuries, the high watermark of Islamic expansion into Europe. The beginning of Ottoman retreat, the birth of a new European consciousness. From Vienna's ashes, Europe's phoenix rose. The siege that transformed the continent's destiny. Pattern interrupt, but Mustafa's story wasn't over. Reaching B grade, the Grand Vizier found emissaries from the Sultan, not reward but judgment. On December 25, 1683, Christianity's holy day, the silk cord ended Kara Mustafa's ambitions. Strangled by deaf mutes in Ottoman tradition, the man who'd nearly conquered Europe died in shameful silence. Immediate transformations began. Vienna, nearly erased, would be rebuilt as Baroque jewel. The trauma transformed into triumph's architecture. Churches rose where mosques might have stood. Coffee houses opened, serving the brew discovered in Ottoman camps, civilization's bitter gift from its wood conquerors. But Vienna's salvation was only the beginning of a transformation that would reshape the world. The immediate pursuit into Hungary began Europe's counter-strike. What started as desperate defense transformed into offensive warfare. Christian armies, united by victory, pressed into Ottoman territory. Fortresses that had stood for centuries fell in months. The empire that had only known expansion discovered retreat. The Ottoman Empire's permanent decline started on those Vienna fields. Never again would Turkish armies threaten Europe's heart. The Treaty of Karovitz in 1699 would confirm what Soy's charge began: Ottoman retreat from Europe, empires redrawn with Vienna as the pivot point. Hungary liberated, the Balkans contested, the historical tide reversed. Kerem Mustafa met his fate. Silk cord of failure on Christmas Day, 1683. The Grand Vizier who dreamed of praying in street. Stephen's Cathedral died in Belgrade, strangled by the Sultan's deaf mutes. His execution marked more than personal failure. It symbolized the empire's inability to adapt, to accept that expansion had limits. The Treaty of Karovitz in 1699 codified Vienna's consequences. The Ottoman Empire ceded Hungary, Transylvania, Croatia, and Slovenia. Lines on maps that would shape centuries. The Habsburgs ascended from desperate defenders to continental power. Vienna transformed from frontier fortress to imperial jewel, its architecture still echoing triumph. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth experienced its swan song. Sobieski's victory marked Poland's last moment as Europe's savior. Within a century, the kingdom that saved Christendom would vanish from maps, partitioned by powers it had protected. History's bitter irony, the savior consumed by the saved, but Vienna birthed something unprecedented. European unity concept, shared enemy had created shared identity, Protestant and Catholic discovering common ground. German and Pole fighting together, the template for coalition warfare. When civilization faces existential threat, ancient hatreds become luxuries. Cultural transformation followed military victory. Architecture flourished. Baroque Vienna rose from siege rubble. Music evolved. Turkish instruments inspired new sounds. Coffeehouse culture spread from captured Ottoman supplies. The enemy's gifts becoming civilization's inheritances. War's strange alchemy transforming destruction into creation. Modern parallels illuminate timeless truths. When civilizations clash at existential levels, when mathematics favor one side overwhelmingly, when technology meets determination, Vienna reminds us human will can overcome numerical superiority. Courage properly applied multiplies while fear divides. The philosophical weight bears examining. 15,000 held against 300,000. Individual choice aggregating into historical pivot. Each defender who didn't flee. Each civilian who carried ammunition. Each moment of choosing resistance over surrender. History turned on thousands of individual decisions. Think about this for a moment. The siege proved individuals matter in history's great movements, not just kings and generals, but bakers and mothers. The grandmother who died pouring boiling water, the child who carried messages through bombardment, anonymous heroes whose names vanished but whose courage echoed through centuries. This is why it matters to you. Vienna 1683 demonstrates that overwhelming odds aren't destiny, that civilizations rise and fall on ordinary people making extraordinary choices, that sometimes at history's hinges, courage does weigh more than numbers. The Winged Hussars' charge remains history's greatest cavalry action. But the true victory was forged in 60 days of anonymous heroism, in tunnels where enemies died embracing, on walls where merchants became warriors, in streets where starvation met defiance. 18,000 horsemen proved that sometimes in history's crucial moments, courage does weigh more than numbers. The Ottoman Empire came to Vienna with everything. They left with nothing, and Europe discovered it could stand as one. The echo continues. Every time civilization faces existential threat, every moment when mathematics favor tyranny, every instance where individuals must choose between easy surrender and impossible resistance. Vienna whispers across centuries.